Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome Eduard Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, Ambassador of Hungary to the Holy See, back to GB News with your second book on the subject of family, not on the Habsburgs this time, but on how to build a wholesome family in a broken world and advocating marriage and children. How receptive do you think people are to this traditional message?
Well, first of all, thank you for having read my book. I think that it's an important book for our times. I'm stating the obvious a lot. I'm saying things that were totally normal over the last centuries, even millennia. I think that people are, in a way, probably thankful for someone giving them a few hints how to build a wholesome family, because most people don't manage. You look around you, you have broken marriages, you have people living together, you have nobody having children. People never experience a wholesome large family, and but it's not their fault, because they never meet anybody who has many children. They never meet anybody who is married for decades and happily so, very rarely. So I thought I'd write a little book that people can buy and experience, and I'm trying to get across what a great and wonderful experience it is to have lots of children, to have a wholesome family, to be married for decades, how wonderful it is to be married for decades. And it's peppered with Habsburg examples, but it's really mostly my experience.
And you have 6 children, you've got 5 girls and 1 boy.
Yes, indeed.
And 1 grandchild and another
Yes.
on the way.
Yes.
So you have lived this example. But is it something that is practical in a way that people can live their lives, in terms of how can they afford to have so many children, the housing problem, should they be concerned about the environment and the resources that children use?
Yes, I know that even members of the British royal family sometimes said things like we should be mindful of climate and have less children. No, I believe that, look, we live in the best, wealthiest, safest, best medically assisted time ever in Western civilization. People are well, you can afford almost anything, but you can't afford children. It's absolutely ridiculous. Our ancestors had children when they had next to no money. It wasn't always easy, but it was normal. It was the conditio humana, was to have children as a family. And I believe that you have to make adjustments. That's why I strongly encourage couples, before they get even engaged, I've got a list of things that you should checklist, what you're looking for in the other person, to have a long and hard talk. Do we have the same idea of family? Because if both are ready to have a large family, this will have consequences. And I know, because I wasn't always an ambassador, when I had my many children, I was a script writer. So it really means priorities, hashtag priorities. You have to decide having a lot of children will mean you won't always have the latest iPhone models. Not everybody can afford to have their own computer. You might have to have a beat-down, large, old, used car. You might not be able to afford an apartment downtown Manhattan or London, because you might have to go to a place where you can afford a house. These are all decisions, but you have to have these decisions to make them together before you even get engaged. Because if the other person is not along on the ride, there will be problems.
And do you have to have faith to want to have a large family? Is that an essential part of it because of the commitment that comes from the sacrament of marriage? Is that really the true building block of family life?
So as Hungarian ambassador, who is very proud of what his government is doing, and profiting, I have 6 children, financial incentives, tax help for families that want to have more children. I still believe that this can only get you so far. And that's why in my book, the first on my checklist, what you're looking for a Christian. Ideally, you're looking for a Catholic. I even encourage people to become Catholic, because I believe that the Catholic Church has both the tool set for a long and happy marriage, but also the teaching and all the help you need as a couple to go on a long and very happy path together. So yes, I truly believe that faith is an indispensable ingredient. I believe you can be married without common faith. You can even be married without having a belief, but you can also climb Everest without oxygen. It's possible, but it's so much more difficult. If you have faith in common, you will get across every hurdle that comes your way.
But this is quite a controversial message in a secular world, because you're preaching chastity and living within the teaching of the church, and that's not the modern way. The modern way is sexual liberalism and fornication.
Look around and see how many people look happy, how many experience a real happy marriage. What I strongly encourage in this book is, don't go on one affair after the other. Don't have one relationship, break it off, have a new one, break it off. Because you're expected to do so. Because in school it's like normal. Everybody does it. And it's like, you're young, you have to have fun. But the price you pay for that fun is that at some point you're not able to have a decades-long, happy, fulfilled marriage. Even without wanting to clobber you over the head with a Catholic teaching, chastity makes sense. But it's so much easier within the Catholic Church because we're human beings, we're sinful. And there's so many things that try to drag us apart. Our society today, from pornography via everything else, tries to drag couples apart. The Catholic teaching, confession, are very helpful tools.
And so you recognise that though you're advocating chastity, people will fail, but through confession they can redeem themselves and put things back together again.
Yes. I believe, again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This was the Catholic way over centuries, and of course in my family, in the Habsburg way, is isn't suddenly wrong since the 1960s. I don't exactly know why it should be. There is this idea that humanity has sort of transcended some sort of soil. They jumped across a hurdle, and now everything's different, and everything that always counted doesn't count anymore.
And one of the things that's very different is many more women are working in the workplace, and indeed the income is necessary to support the family. Yes. But again, you're saying something quite controversial in the modern world, that you think mothers primarily should be carers for their children.
Yes, I know that it's going to be very controversial, and one will believe that I want to drag women back to the kitchen and the children. But it's simply, if you look at children, you and I both have children, and we saw them grow up, and we experienced the first weeks and months. My father has a saying that I always thought was wrong until I had my own children. He said, the education of a child is finished at 3 years. It's incredibly provocative, but it's really true. Those first few years shape the worldview. Their ability to love, their way they see themselves, their faith, everything. Do you really want to hand those incredibly important years over to someone else while you go out and work? It's possible that you have no choice. It's possible that you cannot afford to have a family without that. But think hard what your motivation is. Are you working because you think you have to? Or is it the best you could do for your family? My claim in this book is you always have to ask yourself, what is the best for our family? It may be that the father stays at home. I'm not advocating at all costs that the mother has to be the carer at home. But I believe that this is the best for the children.
And is there a lot of societal pressure on parents not to stay at home? That the societal norm is now to put children in nursery as soon as possible, and for both parents to work.
Yes.
And that puts a pressure, even on those who would like to follow what you're saying, that it's not what their friends are doing, it's not what people expect.
My wife, when we had our first baby, she told me, you know, before I got married with you and was expecting a child, I couldn't even imagine not to work and stay at home because it was so looked down upon. You were a loser. You absolutely achieved nothing in life. There is this idea, the only way you can prove your worth is through work in a man's world for a woman. That's the only way. Being at home, you're a loser. My wife told me when she held our first daughter once, she looked at me and said, I've looked for something all my life, now I found it.
And I mean, having been present at the birth of all 6 of my children, it is the greatest and most exciting miracle. There are 2 of you in the room, and suddenly there is a third.
a third that was there all the time for many months, a third that got used to your voice, your wife's voice, that knows you. When your voice sounds and your wife's voice sounds, this baby knows everything's fine. I'm with my parents. It's the greatest miracle, and is the moment of greatest respect, where I also thank God on knees that I'm not a woman.
And indeed. And you put a remarkable piece in your book, which I agree entirely, that I think is worth reading out. When you have your second child, you will be astonished at how incredibly different human beings are from their very first days, man and woman, baby and baby, that it's quite remarkable. The newborn baby is not an extension of the mother and father, nor is number 2 exactly the same as number 1 or numbers 3, 4, 5 and 6. They are all, from the moment of birth, individuals who behave, think, have a character that has been formed already.
Yes. Well, 2 things on that. First, when you have your first baby, it's like a van drives over you. Your entire world changes. Everything changes. You have to adapt, and then after the first child, you sort of feel we know how baby works. And then this totally new person comes along that isn't just you and your wife. It's someone totally new. And I remember our first daughter, she yelled, she screamed, and then she slept. My second daughter, she had just come out of my wife, and they were caring for my wife, and they gave her to me. Then I carried her in my arm, walked up and down in the room, and told her a story about 3 little mice that live in the forest. And she looked at me with that dark eyes of hers that said, "Are you up to this?" There was this, she looked at me, and she has this look today still. Yeah. It's like, I remember when my 2 daughters were faced with Santa Claus at a celebration. My elder daughter tried to please and be nice with him. My younger daughter had her closed down look, totally concentrated, not showing her. She had that 5 minutes after her birth. So I totally agree. They are extraordinary human beings with different souls. Let's just name it what it is.
Indeed. And you also say that some people worry if they have more children, they don't have sufficient love to go round for their... Yeah. But this just isn't true, is it? No. That the number of children you have, it's not a divisible love, it is an infinite love.
No, it's not. I can't speak for people who have more than 10 children. I always manage to remember my children's names, mostly, and their birthdays. I think I know all of their birthdays. But the old question...
Do you sometimes muddle up your children's names?
Yes, sometimes.
Yes, I'm good, because I do that the whole time.
So usually with the younger ones, the elder ones are easier, but with the younger ones you sometimes have to throw out several names when you call them.
Good, I'm glad I'm not the only one who does that.
But ask yourself, after 6 children, which one should we scratch? Which one don't we? It's unthinkable. You love them. You would throw yourself in front of a bus to save their lives for every one of them. And they always ask you, whom do you like best? I couldn't say it. Oh, of course, you, my dear, is when you're alone with them. But in reality, I always say, no. It's different. It's different.
It's very easy. I've got one daughter. I say she's my favourite daughter.
Yeah. I do that with my son.
Your son.
I do that with my son, yes.
Yeah. And she corrects me and says, "You mean child?" And then daughter.
daughter.
And in part of your love for your children, you bring them into the Catholic faith, and you introduce them to it. Yes. And you're very strong on saying that you don't lead by instruction; you lead by doing.
Yes. My father always said to us, and I think he's totally right: children don't do what you tell them to do; they do what you do. They watch you. They see how you do. And for instance, if there is a problem, something really bad happens, and if both parents sit down to pray together, they will notice. If they know that their father has a rosary in the pocket, if they see their mother queuing up for confession, they will do that. Not if you tell them, you have to. They will see whether you pray yourself. And I believe the moment you get married in a Catholic marriage, you promise to raise your children in the faith, the ones that God will give you. Of course, we're aware that not everybody automatically can have children, and that's a very, very difficult and hard topic that I try to address a bit in here. Yes. But what I'm saying is, God will only ask you one question when you meet Him. It's like, have you tried to bring your soul and the souls of the people given to you to me? That's the only question. Not how great were you in Parliament, how much did you earn. It's only that. Did I do everything I could to bring my children towards God. And that's why this is a strong topic in my book again.
And you take your children to Mass from
Yes.
the day they're born. You don't say they're not ready for it.
No.
One of your themes, actually, is getting on with things. So if you think it's right to get married, you get married. Once you've got married, you crack on and have children.
Yes.
Once you've got children, you take them to Mass.
Yes,
you have them baptised quickly.
Quickly.
And you get, to my mind, the priorities right, that the sacraments are about the sacrament, the outward sign of the inward grace, not about the party that may be attached
Not at
to
all.
it.
In fact, I look back with shame at my earliest children, which we baptized weeks, sometimes months later, because we wanted to wait until everybody was in good shape. Aunt so-and-so could come to travel, and my wife was... That's not the point. You baptize the child to give it a chance to make it to heaven. Why should you wait with that sacrament? You can make a celebration half a year later, but baptism should be about a meeting with this child and God and their love story beginning. Why not begin immediately? The Habsburgs always baptized, ideally on the same day. Very often the mother wasn't even present.
Yes, I did point out to my wife that traditionally wives didn't need to be present at baptism. This wasn't necessarily the most popular thing I've ever said. But I share your view that the baptism is a priority and is not a social event. And then you found that your children have carried on in the faith.
The wonderful gift, and it's really not through our greatness, but only through God, is that all of our children do their prayers, they love God, they go to Mass even if we're not around. They go to Mass not only on Sundays, but sometimes during the week. They have an active prayer life and they speak about their faith, and many of them give testimony, and all of that is nothing you can do. It's just if you let the sacrament live in your family. Because, many get married in a church because it's nice and the woman wants to wear something in white and it's tradition. But you have to actively invite God into the center of your family. And that's why I say you have to look for someone who shares your faith and for whom God is the most important thing in the world.
And crucially, this then helps you for a prepared death, because actually a lot of the teaching of the Church is about preparing for the end and for a provided end with your family around you and with prayers, but without fear. And so you're providing not only with a stable family happiness and fulfillment in life, but also the chance of eternal salvation.
Yes, absolutely. Already in my first book, I spoke about how the Habsburgs were always aware of death coming, of having to render accountability to God one day. And in this book, I try to show how it's important that death has also to be accompanied and lived in the family. Also, weakness and getting ill of parents. This is one of the commandments of God, that you should look after your parents. So the family is the place where you get caught, even if when you're weak, even if you're dying. And I strongly recommend families. We are used to death happening somewhere else, in a hospital. My mother told me that her mother died surrounded by all her daughters, praying with her and singing with her. And there is many examples of Habsburgs dying surrounded by their family. Even Joseph II, whom I don't like very much, he saw to it that his mother, Mother Teresa, had the sacrament, and he was there uninterruptedly for days at her bed praying for her. So, the priorities were right.
We're right, yes. Well, I'm glad we've ended on the fourth commandment, which is one I try and tell my children is fundamentally important. They tease me and say, on your mother, granny, nanny, school teachers. The father never gets quite added on the end of the list, but I think they know really. Archduke, Your Excellency, thank you very much.
A pleasure.